Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Just wanted to let you know you are here today for Teens, Screens, and the Summer of COVID-19 with Dr. Paul Weigel. We're certainly glad that you've joined us. And as you come on, if you could enter your first name and where you're joining us from in the question section, that would be amazing. Thanks everyone for joining us for Teens, Screens, and the Summer of COVID-19 with Dr. Paul Weigel. We are excited to welcome you in today. Hi Brenda from Iowa. Got some folks from Savannah, Ohio, from New York, Rochester, New York, and Texas. Carol from Kentucky, welcome. Tasha from Texas. California and Maine are with us as well. Rhode Island. Arizona, Angie from Minnesota, Michigan, Kansas, Southern New Jersey, Greenwood, South Carolina, Vicki from New York, Britt from Iowa, Anna from California, hello Kelly from Kentucky, great, Renee from Pennsylvania, Brooklyn from New York. We just wanted to take a minute and have you guys test out the question feature. We appreciate you doing that. Want to welcome everyone to Teens, Screens, and the Summer of COVID-19. We're so excited to learn today with Dr. Paul Weigel. Got some folks from Savannah, Ohio. Welcome. Hi, everyone. Michelle Massey with Operation Parent. I want to take just a couple of minutes to talk you through the technical parts of the program that we'll be using today. Most of you have showed us already you're familiar with the question feature, but if you've just joined us and you're brand new to our program, I want you to click on the orange arrow in the top of your screen. Then look halfway down that panel, you're going to see the question section. You're going to be muted during this presentation. However, we cannot wait to hear from you in that question section. So you're going to send both comments and questions there. In the light blue panel of the question section, that's where you're going to insert any communication that you'd like to have with us today, and that's going to come privately and directly to myself. Send us questions anytime during the webinar. We love questions. That's primarily what we're here for today. You can send them at any time. As I said, we're going to work really hard to get to all of your questions today. This might take us over the 60-minute mark. However, keep them coming, keep sending them, send them all throughout the webinar, and we'll get to as many as we can, most likely all of them. But just know that our attendance is growing, our viewership is growing, so if for some reason we can't get to every single question while we're live today, we will make sure that we follow up with you following the presentation. So we have some awesome handouts lined up for you today. They are titled Screen Time and Children, Screen Time During COVID, Video Games and Children Playing with Violence, Social Media and Teens. And then we've also provided you with a copy of the slides that you will view with us during today's presentation. Just double click on the handouts to begin the download process that you can see here in the system today. Go ahead and do that now if you're interested in having the handouts following the presentation, because they will only be available in this location while we are live. However, you should have received an email from us about an hour prior to us going live that should also contain the handouts. So if for some reason you're having any issues downloading today or you're on your phone, you should also have a backup email in your inbox that you could get the handouts in that location. We're recording this presentation today, and it will be sent to you tomorrow afternoon. Our viewers are remarkable. The number of you that complete the survey and the important, valuable feedback that you give us, we are so grateful for that. So please keep that coming. As you get the survey, let us know how we're doing and what you'd like to see from us next. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to turn the webinar over to Dr. Paul Weigel, who's a child and adolescent psychiatrist out of the Connecticut area.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. Paul Weigel again, and I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, which means that I'm a physician that treats mental illness in kids and teens. I work with Hartford Healthcare, but my area of focus and my area of study is really the effects of screen habits on the mental health of kids and teens, and this is for a couple reasons. One is that I've noticed that since I finished my training in 1999, that more and more often issues with kids, with their screen habits, with their video game play, with their social media, have become intertwined in the issues, the mental health problems for which I'm seeing them. And my other interest is, of course, that I myself am the father of 2 teenagers, and sort of managing their enthusiasm for screen media has been its own challenge. But because of my interest, I serve on the National Scientific Advisory Board for Children and Screens, the Institute of Digital Media and Child Development. I'm also the chair of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry's Media Committee. So, this topic is especially fascinating to me, and I hope it will be for you as well. And so our objectives for today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the extent of screen habits in the lives of American youth, what has become the new normal, because it really has changed. And then how that has changed not only in recent years, but also in relation to the COVID epidemic, which has changed all of our lives. I'm going to be talking a little bit about what it is that makes social media and video games and other screen media so engaging for young people, and take a look a little bit at what science tells us about its effect on the development of the brain. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the physical and mental health effects of screen engagement, whether that's light or heavy or different types of screen experience, and then talk about what we as parents can do to help promote healthy and safe screen habits for our children this summer and going forward. So, what's normal? Sometimes it seems like young people are kind of on their phones or on screens or on video games nearly all the time. But what does research tell us about how much time young people are spending on screens? Well, perhaps the best research we have comes from the Kaiser Family Foundation, which is taken over by Common Sense Media. Every 5 years, they interview thousands of American youth about their screen habits. And when they compare their data from 2000 to their data from last year, they found that the average entertainment screen time that young people are engaging in every day has roughly doubled. It has changed dramatically. And the biggest increases, of course, have been in time spent on the internet and time spent playing video games. And in the last 5 years, the biggest increase, of course, has been online video sharing, like YouTube. So that when you add in all of the, all the video games, the social media, and the TV, adds up to an average of 4 hours and 44 minutes of screen exposure for kids every day, and 7 hours and 22 minutes on average of exposure for teenagers, which is an amazing figure. It's, over the course of a year, roughly the amount of time, twice the amount of time that kids were spending in school, and that's back when they were going to school. But screen media as the internet has become more accessible and more usable in our everyday lives, it really has dominated the free time of kids and teens. So what are they doing when they're online? Well, research tells us that the big three, whether it's tweens or teens, are watching TV or online videos, with, again, online videos taking a bigger share recently than ever before. Number 2 is playing video games. Tweens spend a little more time doing this than teens. And the number 3 for teenagers is, of course, social media. with browsing website and creating content and video chatting, having a relatively small percentage of their time on screens. So we've seen this big change in the nature of childhood and adolescence in our country. We see on the picture on the left, this is kind of what childhood looked like in the 70s. When I was growing up, spending a lot of times outdoors, and wouldn't really come back home until dinner time. But of course, childhood is much more typically represented by the picture to the right these days, with kids spending more and more of their free time engaged in screen entertainment. So doing all this, so this change in the lives of young people, the near doubling of their screen entertainment exposure, it has been something of a national experiment, essentially, to see what the effects have been on the lives of young people. And it's fascinating to me what the results have been. So there have been some significant changes in the lives of teens in particular that have happened at the same time. And we can't say 100% certainty that these changes are because of their screen habits, but I really think it's very likely, because the change in their screen habits is the biggest change in the lives of young people. And we're comparing data here from the year 2000 to more recent data. And we found that one wonderful change is that teens are engaging in far less risky behavior. Teen pregnancy rates across demographics in this country have halved since the year 2000. They may be sending each other, pictures or engaging in pornography, but they're much less likely to get pregnant. The violent crime has plummeted in this country since the 90s. The rate among adults, but also among teens, is half of what it was. So again, young people may be, shooting each other on Fortnite, but they're not shooting each other on the street, certainly not at rates that they were in the 1990s. There's also a lot of evidence that alcohol, cigarette, drug use has also fallen among teens. We can see in the bottom left-hand chart that alcohol use, the percentage of teens who said they've used alcohol in the last month, has roughly halved in that time, and cigarette use fell even further. Now, this data does end in 2016, so it doesn't account for the recent vaping craze, which might alter this graph somewhat. But there's even evidence that marijuana use has actually decreased among teens since the year 2000. For all the concerns about legalization, less teens are using it than were, and there's evidence that even prescription drug use has fallen. So again, there are some concerns that many teens may become addicted to video games or to social media, but they're less likely to get addicted to drugs and alcohol. And we're also seeing a significant decrease in the rate of teen deaths by motor vehicle accidents, and that has roughly halved since the year 2000, after it was pretty stable, pretty plateaued during the 90s. And one reason that we'll see for this is that teens are less likely, they're waiting to get their license until later. But for all the concern about texting and driving, which again should be a concern, teens, in many ways, they're much safer than they were just 20 years ago. And I think a lot of that is due to the screen media, that they're spending time on screen media and they're not out engaging in risky activities like these. So at the same time, we've also seen a significant decline in healthy behaviors that are important for health, well-being, and development. One is in-person socializing. In real life, teens are spending less time socializing with their peers than they ever have before. At least since this data started to be collected. Of course, teens are learning less skills, like learning how to drive. They're delaying that and much less likely to get their license until a later time. In the last generation, we're really witnessing the demise of reading books and magazines and newspapers for enjoyment. Among teens, the percentage of teens who say they read on a daily basis, which has been dropping for many years with the rise of screen media in general. But just since the year 2000, it's decreased from 40% to under 15%. So reading is really, at least traditional reading from a book, is really disappearing. And sleep has been terribly effective. And I'll talk a little bit about sleep and its importance later, but you'll notice this graph, this fourth graph, actually goes up, and that is actually because it's not the hours of sleep that young people are getting, but the percentage of teenagers who are getting less than 7 hours of sleep a night. And of course, sleep experts tell us that kids really need 8 to 10 hours in order for optimal functioning. So so here we see the percentage of teens who don't get enough sleep increasing from already high 25% around the year 2000 to close to 40%. And again, the biggest mediator is their screen habits. Also, two other changes we've seen is a continued rise in the rates of obesity among adults and among kids have risen another 30% since the year 2000. A lot of that has to do with the junk food diet that goes along with heavy screen use and lack of exercise that comes with excessive screen habits. And at the same time, we've seen a big increase in the incidence of nearsightedness. And this is largely mediated by time spent indoors. If you're not spending time outdoors, you're much more likely to have a problem with nearsightedness. And this problem is only expected to increase. We've also seen a terrible rise in the rates of anxiety and depression among young people, among teens. And we've seen huge increases, unfortunately, in rates of self-harm and suicide. Psychiatric admissions, emergency room visits for these issues have roughly doubled in recent years. And unfortunately, in the rate of completed suicide, which has nearly doubled in recent years as well. And so that suicide is now the second leading cause of death in adolescence. And we know the studies tell us that teens who are spending the most time online are at the greatest risk for having these issues. So these are all correlations, and they are important. But what else does research tell us about the effects of screen habits on the mental health of young people? Well, there is a wealth of studies looking at this, and in general, I'm not going to review so much individual studies, but talk about what the themes are among the studies. And one review found that 32 studies all agreed, having strong, consistent evidence that the more time young people are spending on screens, the more likely they are to have depression, and the less likely they are to be satisfied, the more likely they are to have psychological distress. 200 studies also showed associations, not as strong associations, but certainly significant associations with time spent on screens with behavior problems, low self-esteem, and poor physical fitness. So again, these aren't causal, but the relationships are very important. And these are hundreds of studies showing essentially the same thing. Not every study has found these, but the significant majority has. And some show a little bit of a curvilinear pattern, and I'll show you what that means here. That essentially means that the relationship's a little bit complex. So what we're looking at here on the y-axis, the up and down axis, is the self-reported well-being of and mental health of young people. And on the x-axis, the cross-axis, is how much time they spend engaging in screen media, the different colors being different types of screen media, TV and video games, computers, smartphones, so to speak, or so on. So what it finds is you see this interesting little
All right, it just seems like we've lost Dr. Weigel here. We'll just wait. And he's at work, so his internet is a little bit spotty. So if everybody just holds on, hopefully his internet will turn back on here and he'll start streaming again. Apologize for the interruption. Dr. Weigel, if you can hear me, if you need to, you can always, okay, hold on. All right, we're just gonna wait here. And he's just coming back on. So just hold on for just a moment, everyone.
Hello, can you hear me again?
Yes, I can hear you, Dr. Weigel. I'm just going to send a request back to your webcam. If it starts freezing again, I'm going to just shut off your webcam.
That'll do it.
Your stream there. Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. So what we see is that after an hour or two a day of any type of screen entertainment, it actually is associated with a negative correlation with self-reports of mental health. So it seems like a little bit actually might be a good thing, but the several hours a day that a lot of young people are spending actually has a negative impact on their mental health. And the biggest mediator of this relationship might not be the fact that that what they're doing online is directly bad for them or toxic, although that can happen sometimes, and we'll talk about that. But really, the biggest effect may be the effect on sleep. And because many studies show the more time young people spend on screen media, the less they spend on sleep. And sleep is so important for physical and mental health in a way that we often, as adults, don't appreciate because our sleep schedules tend to be relatively regular. But sleep is very important for learning. Because it's during sleep that our memories from the day are consolidated into long-term memory. So how much of today's talk you remember may have more to do with how well you sleep tonight than anything else. Sleep is also very protective against obesity, against depression and anxiety, and against suicidal thoughts. And again, time spent on screens really is the enemy of good sleep. And the way that the most obvious way that happens is simply that kids want to stay up later, and they want to do their screen media, and they often do, or sometimes they're up at night when their parents don't even know they're on screens. And this is of course easy to see. You know, when I was a kid, there really wasn't much on TV late at night. There wasn't much to do, so it was just natural to move to sleep unless you were a big fan of late night TV. But these days, kids have access to anything that they enjoy at any time, and oftentimes nighttime is the time that they enjoy doing that most. But the longer they stay up, of course, the later until they get to sleep. Another relationship another reason for this relationship between sleep and screen media is conditioning. Because so many kids are engaging in screen media, whether they're watching shows or whether they're on their phones when they're in bed, and that actually makes it harder to fall asleep when you want to. There is effective conditioning where if you only are in the bed when it's time to sleep, then when you lie down, your body just knows. It feels the bed, it says, okay, it's time for sleep, and it makes that transition. But young people who are lying in their bed for hours a day looking at their phone or watching videos or playing video games, they lose that conditioning, and it makes it harder to fall asleep. Another significant factor is arousal. Studies show that even after turning off the video game or the social media, it actually takes 2.5 times longer to fall asleep than if you were reading a book or even watching a television show before sleep. And this, again, is because these games are exciting. They increase your blood pressure, your pulse, they get you engaged and excited. And when the TV goes off, your mind may still be on the battlefield for a while, and it takes longer to fall asleep. Blue light is also important because our mind's circadian rhythms are triggered by light. Studies show that the more light that teenagers are exposed to in the evening, whether it's light from indoor lighting or light from screens, that actually interferes with their circadian rhythms. It essentially makes their brain think it's still the daytime. And teens are especially susceptible to this. Teens actually don't have a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle the way that children and adults do. They have a 25-hour sleep-wake cycle, which is why it's so hard, which is why teens hate to go to bed. They have a harder time. They have a harder time falling asleep just regularly making that transition to sleep than others do. And so oftentimes the answer to this, especially in the summer, is to let teenagers stay up later and sleep later. And a little bit of this can be healthy, but unfortunately it doesn't help the issue, because this 25-hour sleep-wake cycle essentially means that teens are always a little bit jet lagged. It's like being an hour jet lagged every day of your life. And so if they stay up later and sleep later, then they're just going to want to stay up later and sleep later after that. So in the short term, it relieves them, but it actually makes the problem worse if teens are allowed to sleep late. So enter COVID-19, which really, of course, has changed all of our lives, but it especially changed the relationship of young people and their screen media. This New York Times article, I like the title. It said, "Coronavirus ended the screen time debate. Screens won." And they did to a large degree. Survey of 3,000 parents, they indicated that the average amount of time their kids were spending on screen entertainment doubled just from February to March. And of course, I think we all know why. They were at home without anything to do. Maybe they had a distance school, but that only was, for half of their day, if that. So they were faced with enormous amount of time and not much to do. During the same time, traffic to children's apps increased by 70%. So really, the numbers that I quoted you before, the 7 hours a day of screen media exposure, really they don't apply to the coronavirus era. They're likely to increase further. And since summer has hit, a lot of teens are spending even more time. Some are enjoying time outside and doing vacations with their family, but without school and with many camps closed, many young people are spending more time on their screens than even that they did in the spring. Wanted to talk a little bit about why social media and video games are so habit forming, because a lot of times as adults, some of us really enjoy these technologies too, of course, but many of us have a hard time understanding why, our daughters, for example, might want to be spending, 7 hours a day, scrolling through Instagram or TikTok feeds. So one thing that is especially attractive to young people, especially young people with social anxiety, is that communication on social media or texting is asynchronous. That means that it's not in real time. And this is especially valuable to young people who naturally feel more self-conscious about how they look and how they come across to others. Why is that? Well, you're not really put on the spot for what to say or how to respond. You can stop and think about how you want to respond to that text or that comment, and you're never really on the spot. And also, other people can't see you or hear how you react. So if your voice cracks or if you have a stunned look on your expression, nobody knows. And this is why especially young people who have depression or young people who have anxiety prefer, even more than their peers, to communicate on social media rather than in person. And they're able to really cultivate their identity on social media in a way that it's hard to. So I remember a young person telling me, I wish people would really take a look at my Instagram page before they met me in real life, because that way they'd know my real self. So this girl basically expressed that she felt like she was able to be who she wanted to be or express who she wanted to be on social media. And of course, social media provides instant, a peer connection, and oftentimes identity affirmation. A kid might not feel good about themselves, but if they look and see that they have 400 followers and their recent post got hundreds of likes, they feel good about themselves. and many young people really get into a habit of checking obsessively their social media hundreds of times a day even, and for those who get, who actually get off in between. And the reasons they do, number one, they want to look and see, are my posts getting likes? That's the biggest reason. To see, is anyone saying anything negative about me? Because teens often feel like they have to be there to defend their reputation on themselves on social media, and you never know when an attack is going to come. And are my friends having fun without me? And of course, this is called FOMO. But these are the reasons that teens often check compulsively. And again, I mentioned that how social media allows you to really cultivate the image that you want to present to the world. This was a Times cartoon that says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And here we see the Facebook version of you and the realistic version. And of course, teens know this, and we all know this, and yet oftentimes when we're scrolling through other people's feeds, we forget that these pictures are have been touched up. We forget that we're seeing a slice of their lives that really probably doesn't represent their everyday. And vulnerable teens who are vulnerable to social comparison, to comparing themselves to others, oftentimes have the worst time on social media, because on social media, it really does look like everyone is having a better, more exciting, more fulfilling life than you are. And for some teens, this can really lead to big problems with self-esteem. Another thing that's important, that video games and social media meet psychological needs that we all have. According to self-determination theory, humans have physical needs, right? We need shelter, we need oxygen, we need sustenance. But human beings also have psychological needs. And according to self-determination theory, these are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy is the need to have control over the course of our lives. It's kind of the opposite of feeling helpless, right? And during the school day, mostly kids are told where to go and what to do. If it's not their teachers, it's their parents. But in the video game world and on social media, kids have an enormous amount of control over where they go, what they do, what do they give likes to, what do they comment, what do they want to post. In the video game world, they have a myriad of choices. And so even compared to other forms of entertainment, like even watching Netflix or something, you can choose what video you want to watch, but you don't really have any control over the course of the action. And in video games and social media, you're the one in control. We all also have the need to feel competent, and this is to feel effective in dealing with our environment. And this is a vital part of being human. And video games, for example, are very good at challenging players in a real way, that you have to focus and you have to put effort forward in order to be successful. But if you do, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to move forward and have success. So video games actually make you feel very competent. And you really feel when you get to level 100 in Candy Crush like you've accomplished something, even though perhaps you've just wasted however many hours of your life. But social media, similarly, when you put that post that gets hundreds of likes, or that gets a great deal of attention, you feel like you've accomplished something, even if maybe you haven't necessarily. Finally, we all have the need for relatedness, the need to connect with other human beings, the opposite of loneliness. And as I mentioned, social media and video games as well are very good at putting young people in touch with one another in a real, although limited way. It is not the same as being, with someone in person, and there are some, real drawbacks to that. But it provides that connection. It makes you feel less lonely. When you play Fortnite, you're instantly introduced to 100 other players who either want to compete with you or cooperate with you to reach mutual goals. And similarly, of course, social media has a way to bring people together. So video games and social media meet these psychological needs that we all have. However, it might not surprise you that in teens who engage the most in video games, in social media, those who have this addictive habit actually feel less of each of these than their peers. They feel less confident in real world tasks. And this, of course, is because they've been devoting so much of their lives to their screen entertainment that they haven't been developing their real world skills. They feel less socially connected to their peers. And this is because the connections they've made online, which again, they are real, but they're very limited and they're not the same as having an in-person relationship. And finally, they feel less control over their lives and less meaning in their lives than their peers who spend a more moderate time on screen media. Something I wanted to bring up about video games in particular that might not apply to social media as much, and that's the concept of flow. I think you might be familiar with flow. It's a term that artists use when they talk about getting their work, the best work done, or you might hear athletes talk about being in the zone. And we can go to the next slide here, but flow is this feeling of being totally immersed in whatever activity you're doing and feeling focused, and it's a very rewarding place to be. But flow doesn't just happen by accident. It's only possible in certain circumstances. And the next slide, we can see that really depends on the activity you're engaging in and what your skill level at that activity is. So for example, we see the chart here. If you're engaging in an activity which is too hard for you, where you can focus on it fully and you're still failing as often as you're succeeding or more, it's anxiety provoking, it's frustrating. You're not going to enter the state of flow. You're going to want to give up, quite frankly. If you're engaging in an activity that is too easy for you, where you can do it and you can succeed almost all the time with barely even thinking about it, essentially half of your brain is freed up to wander, and it's boring, right? It doesn't engage your mind fully. So flow is only possible when you have this Goldilocks zone in the middle, when your skill at the activity you're doing really matches up perfectly with the level of challenge of that activity, and it stays that way. It's not just it's not just for brief periods. And traditional forms of entertainment, like we think about maybe playing sports, for example. There's times when, well, a lot of time where you're sort of sitting around waiting for something to happen. You're not in the zone of flow then. And then maybe you have times where it's too easy or too hard for you. Video games are very good at challenging players and keeping them challenged. So you can't let up for a minute. You can't look away for a minute. And so they keep players in this zone of flow where they have to focus in order to be successful. But if they do focus, they are likely to continue to have success. So video games are good at teaching players to be better players at that game. So what happens as your skill level increases is that video games are very good in that they up the complexity of the challenge, pretty much commensurate with what they expect your skill level to increase. So you're always kept in this zone of flow. And again, it's a really rewarding place to be. And anyone who's tried to get a 12-year-old boy to stop playing Fortnite or to put down his video game knows how jarring it can be to be pulled out of this state. So when we expect, oftentimes we really want for our kids is for them to have the willpower, right, to regulate their own screen habits. And some kids can do this, but for many kids, their willpower on one side against the entire $300 billion entertainment software industry on the other side, it's just not a fair fight. These technologies have been designed to get players playing and keep them playing, and they play upon our basic psychological makeup in a way that expecting most kids to control their own habits is just not fair. Another important thing to remember about the minds of children and teens, they're not just little adults, their brains are different, and their brains are growing and changing, and they can be affected by their screen habits. So the biggest change that's happening, this development process, is actually not a growing of the brain. The adult brain actually has less neurons than the brain of children and teens. In fact, it's the opposite. It's pruning. So it's cutting connections that aren't used in the brain to make the brain more efficient. And it's also laying down
Okay, everybody, we're gonna just wait for his system his internet to come back up to full speed, and we should be able to hear him again. All right, looks like he's getting himself back. I'm sorry for the inconvenience of this. It's just, unfortunately, not everybody has the same strength. Okay, there you are, Dr. Weigel.
I
How about this?
apologize. So maybe
I'm gonna
we'll
leave
go
your
without my.
webcam. Yeah, I'm gonna leave your webcam off. Okay,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
I think that should solve it.
Okay.
So essentially, as I was saying, is that the brain is being sculpted to the adult, to a more mature adult brain. And if kids don't use areas of their brain enough, those parts are not reinforced. They're actually, cut or destroyed. So we can move on to the next one. So essentially, the concern is if you don't use it, you lose it. Which is why, for instance, if an infant is prevented from seeing for the first a couple weeks of his life, they may never regain the ability to see. A blindfold on infant could blind the infant permanently. And similarly, if young people don't engage in motor learning, in social interaction when they're young, often these parts of the brain will be pruned, and they'll never have that chance to develop those skills. So the National Institute of Health did a study where they took brain scans of 4,000 young kids, and they found there was big changes in those who had a lot of screen media exposure and those who didn't. Those who spent a lot of time on screens had not only had they had more aggressive behavior, but they had deterioration in the regions of their brain that correspond to behavioral control. Presumably because in the time spent in screen media, you don't need to exercise control of your behavior in that way. Also, in those who spent the most time on screens, they actually had their brains were overall smaller. They had a premature thinning of the cerebral cortex. So this pruning process had been accelerated in the brains of young people who spend the most times on screens. And again, of course, the concern is that if young people are not engaging in the right experiences and healthy experiences when they get young, their brains will be negatively affected in a way that they can't recover in adulthood. So I don't want to sort of talk just negatives. Social media can be a very positive thing in the mental health and the lives of young people. Of course, most teens use social media to connect with their friends, keep connection with them, especially during COVID, and to make new friends. And those who have teens who use social media to find ways to connect with friends in real life, and those who have a more active use style, in other words, they're commenting, they're posting, those who have a lot of support online, those who are popular, quite frankly, and those who are less invested in their social media. They're not so concerned with how much likes they get or how many friends they have. They actually are healthier for spending time on social media. Social media seems to be protective for these teenagers. It can also be very valuable for minority youth, and this is racial minorities, yes, but also LGBT youth, youth with a learning disability, or also even just youth who have very niche interests can find like-minded peers online, even when they can't necessarily find that at school. So social media can be very valuable and make kids feel that they have more support in their lives. That said, there is a significant connection between social media use and depression. And I mentioned before, depressed teens, they value social media even more than their peers as their only outlet, oftentimes they feel, for expressing themselves. But there's ways that some young people that use social media that make them more likely to have depression and anxiety. And that is if teens have negative interactions online. Their posts don't get liked or they get bullied. If they have a passive use style. So that's sort of just scrolling through and looking at other people's feeds, not posting, not commenting, not liking, just lurking. This is associated with worsening mood over time. In youth who are unpopular, who don't have a lot of friends, oftentimes who go online with the hope that they're going to make friends. However, it does seem that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer on social media as far as popularity is concerned. And these people and people who are unpopular, who spend more time on social media, are at a higher risk for depression. Also, young people who have FOMO, fear of missing out, or worried about that, or who tend to engage in social comparison, as we mentioned, they're more likely to have depression and anxiety the more time they spend on social media. Also, young people who have depression and thoughts about hurting themselves or ending their lives oftentimes want to discuss that online. However, studies show, and they want to do that because they feel that they can find like-minded peers who will understand them, and that certainly makes sense. However, studies show that those who connect with other peers online about their depression, their thoughts about cutting or ending their lives, their depression actually gets worse over time rather than better. So for these young people, it seems like it perhaps could be an echo chamber or have to do with the peer group that they make rather than it just being a release in the way that it's intended. There's a lot of concern about violent video games and their effect on aggressive behavior and violent behavior, maybe more concern than there should be. And that's not because there isn't an effect. There is an effect. There's more than 100 studies of different variety, which essentially show that playing violent video games does desensitize towards violence. It does increase aggressive thoughts, and it increases aggressive behavior. Now, I didn't say violent thoughts or violent behavior because those are harder to study because violent behavior is so rare, but aggressive behavior, less sharing behavior, that kind of stuff. That said, so in my opinion, is close to indisputable fact that violent video games do increase aggressive thoughts and behavior. However, the effect size is not big. The effect size is pretty small. 0.15 is like half the effect size of like an antidepressant on mood, which already are not as effective as we would like them to be. So essentially, violent video games are not going to make a nice kid into a conduct disordered kid or into a violent kid. What they are going to do perhaps is move kids just a little bit along the spectrum to have a little less sharing behavior, a little less thoughtful behavior, that kind of stuff. So that they do have an effect, although the effect is relatively small. Cyberbullying is an important, a life-changing experience for some young people that I see, and research shows that it's the more times kids are spending on social media and on video games, where this happens now more than it used to, the more likely they are to be involved in cyberbullying, either as victims or as perpetrators. Girls, interestingly, more likely to be victims, also more likely to be perpetrators. But recent studies show, most teens say they've been victims at some point, and 1 in 5 admit to perpetrating cyberbullying. And there are many studies which indicate that having this experience can be associated with depression, with risk for trying drugs or alcohol, and having self-harm and suicidal thoughts and attempts. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that every kid who gets cyberbullied has, depression or suicidality. That is absolutely not true. Most do not. But it can be a really terrible traumatic experience for many kids. Sexting, I wanted to bring up. Of course, this is sending naked pictures online of yourself, and Kids, the more time they have with unsupervised internet access, the more likely they are to do it. Also increasing in frequency, especially since kids have the teenagers have the iPhone, and that, you know, decreases the amount of supervision that parents, you know, can engage in. But one study, even back in 2014, most of the college students who were interviewed said that they had sent pictures of themselves when they were a teenager. So it's becoming an increasingly normative experience, as horrible as that is to think about. Now, there are some studies that show that there are negative correlations with mental health and sexting. However, when teens are interviewed and asked about their behaviors, most teens who engaged in sexting say that they didn't really have any negative consequences. Now, they didn't really have any real positive consequences as well, or either. They don't feel like it really helped anything, but in most cases, these pictures are sent in the context of a pre-existing romantic relationship, and they don't usually get passed on or end up, you know, causing problems. That said, there's a certain pattern of sexting that is very high risk and is often likely to end up with the person who sends the picture feeling worse and having the picture sent on to other people. And that is when young people send a picture not in the context of an existing relationship, but in order to start a new relationship. So in other words, if you send me a picture, I'll be your boyfriend. And girls who sext in this way are much more likely to have these negative outcomes. And interestingly, LGBT youth are much more likely to engage in this risky sexting behavior that's likely to turn out poorly for them. Also, pornography, we don't really talk about, but it's very, very common. And unfortunately, studies show it is more common among our kids than we parents think. Studies show that as many as half of children aged 9 to 16 say they have had online exposure in the last month to pornography, whether they meant to or not. And studies with this, where they essentially pair off the children and the parents underestimated the amount of pornography their kids had seen by as much as 10 times, depending on the different category, the different type of pornography. And their kids have easy access to very, very, you know, explicit material, and also, you know, very disturbing material. Content of pornography does often encourage sadomasochism, sexual violence, and kids have very easy access to this. And with the fact that sex education is not actually mandated by most states in this country, and kids get so little sex education in school, really the de facto form of sex education in our country has become pornography. And I don't want to say that this is all bad, but of course there are ways that it really is, because teenagers know that pornography isn't real. They know it's not, you know, just like a documentary, but they don't know what's real, and they don't have anything to compare it to, you know, very often. So they often, so viewing this pornography does change the way that teenagers view sex and their sexual behaviors as well. No one in porn uses a condom, it seems, and so teenagers who watch a lot of porn are less likely to use condoms themselves, more likely to engage in various sexual acts and that kind of stuff. So something, you know, certainly to be aware of. When we think about the needs of our kids and our teens, of course, they need physical safety. But their bodies, in order to be healthy, need adequate sleep, a reasonably healthy diet, some physical movement, and exercise. And as parents, giving them the structure they need, because of course they are not adults, and we're here for a reason, versus the autonomy they need. So we need to have this balance of when to let them make their own mistakes or successes, and when they need us to step in and provide structure. And of course, as children get older, it really, you know, the way the pendulum moves away from structure and towards autonomy, or at least it should, to prepare young people for being adults who are more or less totally autonomous. Kids need to learn the skills that they'll need in adulthood. They need to learn skills they need their family. A lot of teens, like to think that they don't, or try to isolate themselves from their family, but studies show that kids who are isolated from their family do worse across almost every measure. They don't know it, they don't want to admit it, but they need us as their parents. And teens need to figure out who they are. This is the time where they're trying on different identities and seeing what fits. And a lot of the way they do that is with social peer interaction, some of which can be done online, but a lot of which really needs to be done in person. So what are we as parents to do? What can we do about this, about the situation? Kids are spending so much time on screen media. There's a lot of positives, but there's also a lot of real risks and health concerns that we have. Well, you're all familiar with the food pyramid. Well, this is the healthy routine. This is the media habit pyramid. Really, young people need to have a schedule in their lives that allows for sufficient time for, perhaps an increasing order of how much time they need, physical activity and exercise, meal time, because if they don't have that, they're going to snack on junk, self-care, of course, bathing and grooming, family, time with family, and socializing in person. During the summer, they need time for chores and reading for enjoyment. And most of all, perhaps they need time for sufficient and healthy sleep. And then the little time left over at the top was the time that screen media fits in. Studies show massive protective effects of parental monitoring of screen media. If you're paying attention, if you're helping your kid make healthy choices and preventing them from make unhealthy choices, there are really very positive effects. Studies show that parents who do this, the kids have less total screen time, and as a result, their sleep is better, their school performance is better, they're less likely to be obese, they have less exposure to violent screen media, and their behavior is better. So what can we do? How can we support our kids? Well, this is my sort of wish list for the things that I believe as parents we can do to help the physical and mental health of our children the most. And number one really is just getting the screens out of the bedroom. This is at night, of course, but during the day as well. When the kids have screens in their bedroom, we can't supervise them at all. Of course, it's hard enough to supervise an iPhone on the kitchen couch, but in the bedroom, we really lose that. And also, kids are much more likely to use screens in bed, deconditioning themselves to sleep, or to use at night while we think they're sleeping. So screens really don't have any place in the bedroom. Number two is to try to keep a regular sleep and wake cycle. And this means exposing teens to light in the morning. A lot of times this is the best thing we can do to reset their circadian rhythms, is to open up those shades at 8 o'clock in the morning, let the light in, reset their circadian rhythm, let their minds know that it's not really nighttime, and make sure that they're not in bed during the day. And then at bedtime, to make sure all the screens are off. And this will help them to have a more regular and sufficient sleep habit. Number two is limiting screen time, and there is no magic number here. And it is okay in summer on weekends to engage in more screen time than they would during the school year. There's less consequences because they have less responsibilities. But really, screen habits should not be most of their day. There's so many things that kids need to do in order to grow and be happy and healthy, and they're all things they're not doing when they're on screens. And limiting the content. Young kids should not be playing very violent media, and having the wrong content can be unhealthy, as we discussed. We can encourage educational, creative, and social content. So not all content is equal. If kids are spending their time on their computer, creating things, making videos, making music. It really is different than, or doing, Zoom or connecting with friends in real time. That is different than if they're just passively consuming, and healthier. And number 5, of course, is role modeling their behavior. The biggest determinant of child media habits is parent media habits, and I think a lot of us could benefit from, incorporating some of these rules for ourselves. If we are going to be restricting the amount of time young people are spending on screens, then it might fall upon us to fill the remainder of their time and to encourage healthy activities. And of course, in the summer, there's a lot to choose from. What our kids, will actually be talked into, that can be another thing. But learning how to cook, or learning how to drive, being outside, doing hikes and bikes, reading for fun, playing games as a family, a summer job, gardening. These are the things that have great value for our kids. They're just going outside. But as you can see in the next slide, although time spent outside is important, this doesn't count. So when thinking about parenting styles, the most effective parents are the ones who are supportive. They're accepting of their child, they're child-centered, they're not blaming or rejecting. But at the same time, those who have high expectations of their kids, those who demand a lot of their kids. This is this authoritative parenting style, and it does apply to screen media habits and just effectiveness with kids in general. And so what this means is that as kids grow to be teens, we are moving from being a cop with their screen media, which we have to be when they're younger, to being more of a guide, and to try to help them to make their own healthy decisions about screen media. And one way we can do this is by collaborative rulemaking. Kids often don't want any restrictions on their screen media, of course, but if we can come to some sort of consensus with them, if we can come to some sort of agreement that, okay, we can say, well, I don't want you on screens most of the time. When is important for you? Or how, do you want to do more on the weekends and less during the weekday? And if they feel like they have some input into the rules and some buy-in, they're more likely to follow those rules and to think about, controlling their own screen habits. Another is by engaging in screen media together. And of course, as parents, oftentimes we don't like to do this because the times they're on screen is the time we have, to do our own thing or to get something done. However, it is really important to watch shows with kids, to go on social media with kids, to play video games with kids. You can share an enjoyable experience, of course, and understand what it is that they love. I've learned about most of what I've learned about social media is from going on with my daughter and having her, set up a page for me and show me her page and whatnot. But also with that can get the conversation going about making healthy media choices. We want to foster an open communication style, and with teenagers, this is tough. Right? Open communication is tough because teenagers oftentimes want their privacy. But the way that we can encourage this is by being really careful, and when they do share something, that we listen and we show that we respect their opinion, and we don't jump in and tell them our opinion, even though it's tempting to do so. We want to do so, and we want to fix it. We want to tell them what's right. But a lot of times it's much more important that they feel heard and they feel that we respect their opinion, and then they're much more likely to share. So, and important to have a curious attitude in discussing stuff with our teens and not a judgmental attitude as much as possible to keep the conversation going. Resources for parents, I can recommend this book, Raising a Screen Smart Kid by Juliana Miner. It talks about into detail a lot of the stuff I talked about today. Great book. Built-in parental controls can be so valuable on the iPhone, on Windows, on the Xbox or the PlayStation. They all have parental controls that you can put. You can essentially assign when these devices will work, how much time they'll work per day, depending on different days, what type of content will function and what won't. Now, and these are really valuable, and I don't think any kid should get their first iPhone without a whole bunch of stuff disabled. And of course, much easier to set up in the beginning. If you don't know how to do this, and of course, how would you? The best way is not to ask your kid to show you how to do it, of course, but to actually do a YouTube search, like Xbox Parental Controls, and they'll walk you through how to do it. Now, of course, a lot of you may be thinking, kids can get around these controls. And you're right, they can. Oftentimes they're able to figure out ways to get around them. That said, that's why these are not a replacement. These current parental controls are not a replacement for traditional supervision, but they can be a great tool. It is much easier when the Xbox turns itself off and I don't have to wrest the controller away from my son, or my daughter's, social media time, runs out, and it's not me actually trying to, keep an eye on how much time she's spending. Parental control software like Custodio can actually, it goes across different platforms, so that can be a positive. Router devices can be helpful too, or just unplugging your Wi-Fi, at night can be helpful. So, of course, I don't want to give you the impression as parents that we need to be perfect and the kids can only have an hour of screen time a day and we have to do it with them. Our kids are very resilient, and it's okay that we as parents make a lot of mistakes. However, if you really feel like you cannot control your child's screen habits, if you feel like they are going to subvert you no matter what you do, or if you'd be afraid to, if you'd be afraid that if you tried to control their Xbox time that they might hurt themselves or they might hurt you, in the kids who need these limits the most, they often do build up this psychological dependence on their screen media, and when parents take it away suddenly, it can provoke a crisis. It's not an uncommon cause of unsafe situations and admissions to our psychiatric hospital. So if you feel this way, it's important to listen to that, but it's also a sign that this is a situation that really needs to be addressed, that this is a kid who really needs you to intervene and needs help. So if you're feeling this way, that it's really time to seek help from a qualified mental health professional. And your pediatrician can be a good place to start asking about this type of connection. Counseling can be enormously helpful in setting and keeping boundaries for kids and helping them to have healthy habits and either recovering from or preventing depression, anxiety, and other mental illness. So that's game over for me, but thank you so much for your attention.
All right, thank you. I'm going to just turn on my camera here for just a moment. This is Mary Beth Uberti. So I'm going to go through a few slides with everyone, and then we'll get to the question and answer. If you would like to put a question in, now's the time. Go into the question section, click in there, and go ahead and put your question in. In the meantime, just wanted to go over what our next webinar is. This is going to take place on Monday, August 24th at 2 p.m. It's an hour and a half, and it's called Back to School, Helping Kids Overcome School Anxiety and Build Resiliency. So we have Dr. Sharon Saline, who is a psychologist, who is going to be going over this, but also talking about steps that you can take as a parent to discuss the issues that they might be feeling, especially in this, with what we're dealing with COVID. And also it can help you, because I'm sure for a lot of parents who have kids going off to school, and you're probably wondering what's going to happen, what are we going to do? You have your own anxiety, so this is going to be helpful for everyone. So again, this is going to be on Monday, August 24th. Now, something that's going to be different with this one, and I want to just explain this. We are doing this as a webcast. So what that means is we can open it to a bigger audience for the live event. It's wonderful that we can do this. But for those of you that are used to just calling in, that option won't be available. You will have to click through the link to get into this event. So the call-in number, and I know for some people they like to just call in and listen. They're not going through the active link. This will require you to go in through the active link. We will record this, so please register irregardless. We will record this, and then the next day you will always get the recording. So it will be available the next day, but just keep that in mind. Also, we encourage you to take a look at our parent handbook. You can order this through our store at operationparent.org. We do offer a discount of one parent handbook. Use this discount code of WEB072020 to receive a 20% off on one parent handbook. We have a middle high school book as well as elementary. Great books, informational, gives you some tips, things to be aware of, just tons of information on topics related to the social issues of raising your children. So I encourage you to take a look at our website. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, so please follow us. If you have not signed up for our e-newsletter, please go to our homepage and go down to the bottom, and the sign up is right there. That way you'll get notifications of our upcoming webinars with the registration links and keep you up to date on what we are posting. So with that, hold on, I'm going to try to turn on your webcam again, Dr. Paul. So there you are. All right, great. Hold on, let me just get everything ready here. All right, and Michelle, I do have you unmuted also. So, okay, let me get here. All right, here we go. Okay, so somebody's asking, in view of Juul's, e-cigarettes, vaping, more stats, legalizing pot, don't you think these graph numbers show a decrease in unhealthy behaviors have actually increased? Since they're saying Juul did not begin until 2015. And I think you did mention this.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. The charts I showed do not account for vaping, which may have changed the trajectory of certainly changed the trajectory to some degree of nicotine exposure. So that's a fair criticism. If I had a more updated chart, I certainly would have shared it, but they are absolutely of concern. But overall, I do think the trend of substance use and addictions among teens decreasing is a really wonderful one.
Okay, how will the quarantine of young children and teens have how will that affect their brain development? Many do not have Zoom classes and are just on their own at home.
Yeah. So, and this is the concern, right? That in order to for our brains to develop optimally, there's all these really important experiences that young people have to have, and that is socialization, which again in person is very different than talking with someone while you're playing Fortnite, and appreciating nonverbals in many different ways, and in terms of being able to sort of suspend your gratification. It's such an important skill to have, and it's not one that's really exercised when you're spending a lot of time playing video games. Physical exercise and movement, these are so important, and just having a routine is so important for the mental health of young people. And it's super hard and impossible for a lot of parents to provide that in the same way that the school can. I mean, especially of course parents who are working or who don't have a lot of support themselves. It's very difficult to provide that kind of structure that kids had at school. So I do think that unfortunately that it comes with a lot of negatives, and anything we can do to keep kids engaged in life and keep them engaged in activities and with each other, as long as it's safe, of course, is really going to benefit them tremendously.
Yes, that's true. It's going to be a little bit of a juggle too, as school, the decisions are made about school, not just elementary through high school, college also. I mean, that's where we're sitting at, is waiting to find out. We're assuming there will be college. We just don't know. So yeah, it's hard. What
Well,
about the
it can also be an opportunity. I want to say, just for for parents, it can be a real opportunity for us to teach kids stuff and to spend time with our kids that we might not have, when they were at school during the day. So there are to come with opportunities
yeah.
as well.
And there are quite a few parents that I'm starting to hear who are saying, hey, if this ends up happening where they have so many weeks of at home school, they are trying to gather groups together to help each other out. And I think, that's a smart thing to do, is start trying to figure out, who is going to be home, who's good at this subject to help out, because there's been a lot of talk, at least on the Nextdoor app, of I don't know how to teach or help with this. I'm going to need help. And it's going to take a community to really get through this time period. So take advantage of social media parents to learn what are those other people in your neighborhood who could help out, or family members or friends who could help out and help your families. Okay, it says, what about the compounded effect of all the violence and action-packed media, TVs and movies with the video games? Does that increase the rate? So I'm assuming the rate of violence.
Yeah, so the research really shows that violent media in general, not specifically just violent video games, but violent media in general has this effect on aggressive behavior. And so I didn't mean to single out video games, but video games perhaps are the violent media which young people are engaging with the most. So absolutely, films and other sorts of media that can have the same effect.
Okay. Why are students so concerned about how many likes they get or connections that they have, or fear of missing out than others? Why are some more concerned about that as others? And does it correlate with depression and lack of self-esteem? Good question.
So so that's an interesting question. So the social comparison, or the habit of comparing oneself to other people in order to determine our own value, appears to be something of an inherent trait. Some people just have it more than others. Some people just can't help it, but try to keep up with the Joneses, and other people they really just don't care about that. They don't think about that. And a lot of this may be somewhat inherent, that some kids are just born with that trait and some are not. However, interestingly, again, it does make a difference in how they're affected by, for example, social media. So if you have a child who is really concerned about this, and of course teenagers are more concerned in general than adults, but if you have a child that really obsesses over this, too much time on social media can be quite frankly toxic, because it can become a real obsession, or worse than that, and they may be better off away from social media, or at least having much more moderate habits.
Okay. Somebody's just making a comment, no screens in bedroom. Any suggestion for high schoolers who are often forced to use their bedrooms as a virtual classroom and need a laptop in their room during the school day? It's hard for parents to monitor what they are doing on the computer, since the classroom schedule they're not consistent and they're not structured.
Yeah, with my kids, it's kitchen table, and I think that if you can keep it in a public area of the home, it is a lot easier. And and of course, sometimes I get in the mindset of wanting to sort of catch my kid. I'm going to catch them. They weren't doing what they were supposed to, and really we want to think about just trying to guide them and to encourage them to make positive decisions, and to get out of that cop mindset, of course. But yeah, it's tough when they're in the bedroom and the door's closed. It's even tougher. But some families, really, it's just not feasible, for them to be in a more public area. In that case, that there is software you can monitor, but or you could at least have your child leave the door open and have the computer facing the opposite wall, so that when you're walking by, you can see if they're, in class or on Fortnite or that kind of thing. I think that just being there, of course, you can't stop kids from being distracted totally, but it really does help them get distracted less when they know they're being monitored.
Yeah, and your point with using some of the parental control software, you can set, it depends on which product you use, and honestly, you just got to look for what works for your family. But there is a lot of products out there that you can turn off access to certain products for these time periods, which allows you then to at least have some control.
Yes.
Something else you were saying, you want to catch, sometimes you're just looking to catch them, hey, I can see that. But something else to keep in mind as a parent, which I know I have to remind myself, is catch them being good. Just saying, hey, I really appreciate that you're following the rules and I can see you're working, and thank you. That goes a long way to also changing their behavior, and they're going to hear that. Especially if you've not done that in the past, they're like, whoa, what happened? So something to keep in mind.
That's a great point. And when we do notice the kids are getting distracted, I think that we have a tendency to want to maybe shame them and say, look what you're doing, it's the wrong thing. Sometimes it can be more helpful to frame, look, I see this isn't working out, let's take a break and just turn it off for a while, and not sort of frame it as punitive, but more as, this is maybe what you need to refocus.
Yeah. Okay. So what is a healthy gaming number of hours for teens?
Yeah, so that magic number, it is difficult to come up with. And it's not something that really is jumps out in the research study. But the best I can get is that on a school day, probably about 2 hours is about the maximum, and on a weekend maybe 3. And it really does depend if they're engaged. If that's the only screen media they're engaging in, a little more may be okay. If it's in addition to a lot of other things, then you have to take that into account. So yeah, the authorities like the American Academy of Pediatrics have moved away from giving a absolute number, and it really does depend on the child. Some kids, even a little bit of video games will really dysregulate them, and they'll do poorly. And I've seen some cases where they're just so much healthier and happier when they're gone. But usually with most kids, again, 2 or 3 hours depending on the day.
All right, here's a good one. How do you communicate with a typical kid who does not want to talk to the parents? There's no behavioral issues, no violence. They just don't like to share with parents.
Yeah,
I can relate.
And that can be really tough. And I do think that trying to sort of cultivate a habit of engaging in media habits together can be a start, sharing positive experiences. Certainly making sure that dinner time is a habit, and these just sort of make opportunities for these, for discussion to happen. The other thing is that you just want to be aware, like you can't plan these things. And when they do, because I do think that all teens share something sometimes, when they do, is sort of taking advantage by just, again, sort of stopping yourself from telling them what the answer is or telling them what you think, but showing an interest. And in the beginning, they're not going to really trust your interest because they assume that the judgment is coming, and they're going to be found wanting oftentimes. But if you continue to show interest and respect for their opinion, and don't rush to give them the answer except when it's really, really important, they'll begin to trust over time that they can share things, and they're not going to regret it.
All right. Let's see. Can you talk about special needs? I'm not sure if I've got this right. Special needs of a trauma kiddo with screens, maybe a child that's gone through trauma.
Yeah. Well, certainly, young people with a history of trauma are more. They tend to engage in more, or try to engage in more screen media than peers who don't, and they're more susceptible to having issues with anxiety or depression. So I do think that with kids who have that kind of vulnerability, then certainly, paying extra attention to making sure they have healthy habits, it is even more important.
Okay.
And of course, we do want to keep an eye that sometimes kids who have trauma can attempt to gain mastery over that trauma by investigating media that has to do with something like that trauma. For instance, in girls who have been sexually abused, I've seen pornography engagement, or sexting, or trying to romantically engage online. In boys who have a history of being physically abused, sort of an obsession, or witnessing domestic violence, an obsession with violent media. And that can be seen as an attempt to kind of gain mastery over that situation, but oftentimes it's something that kids need to be, kids with those vulnerabilities need to be shielded from as much as possible.
Okay. Somebody's asking about the ratings for games and for TV shows. It's saying they're just seeing more, a lot of sexual situations, unhealthy sex. Did the content ratings change? And do you think that this person thinks that they're going to see some of this as more normal? Is there any movement to adjust the ratings and manage this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I just know, watching shows with, watching family television shows with my kids, the content is not the same as it was, when I was a kid, and use of profanity and right, making light of sexual situations. It's a great question. I'm not aware of any movement per se to kind of move the dial back towards traditional values in that way, although that would be a positive thing. I do use as a resource the website Common Sense Media. I find that it's very helpful, and in general, I do think the ratings are really valuable. I mean, a video game that gets rated T, you can question whether Fortnite is really okay for a 13-year-old, but it is different than a video game rated M like Call of Duty, or a game rated E like Mario. So I do think that the ratings are really important, because it's so hard to know what you're getting into, and that's one of the real concerns with kids engaging in more YouTube and TikTok content, where there are no ratings, and it becomes really hard to protect them from inappropriate content on those platforms.
Yes, that's very true. Recommended hours for limits for different age groups. Is there a place that I've seen that on the American Pediatrics Association list? I would assume it's on the ones that you're talking about also, like kind of a list.
Yeah, and for better or worse, they had the American Academy of Pediatrics has moved away from hour limits, except for the very young. They say under 2, no screen time except Zoom with family members, and from age 2 to 5, I think they might say an hour a day of quality TV content, which of course is unfortunately a far cry from what many youth are exposed to. Yeah, unfortunately, or for better or worse, we don't have that kind of specificity. But I think in general, as far as entertainment screen time, again, and depending on what it is, with some entertainment screen time being, much more useful. Watching shows with your family, for example, isn't really the same as playing a game by yourself. But again, with everything put together, 2 or 3 hours on a weekday, and an hour or 2 more on the weekend, I think is a reasonable goal.
Okay. Let me just go through. We have somebody just saying, thank you so much. This was extremely helpful in understanding my preteen who has been diagnosed with anxiety and depression. She claims that she cannot sleep, and social media helps her mental health. Yeah, and hopefully working with a counselor also will help with some of that. You mentioned pros and cons of screen use in reality. Where do we draw the line and what is balance? Again, that balance screen time. We're going to keep going on to that. Says somebody is afraid that they have a hard time encouraging their child to get off at night and to sleep and to limit their screen time. Yeah. And
it's a challenge. Yeah. But it's really, it is worth it and so important. And again, there's all sorts of tricks you can use depending on the kid. A lot of times letting them know a few minutes beforehand, like for instance, they're a video game player, like a Fortnite player, you can have the 10 or 15 minute warning where they don't start another game after that warning happens. And it can be helpful if you sit with them during that time so they're not tempted to sneak another one in, because it is a lot more merciful for them to stop when their game is over. And an allowance of 5 or minutes more is not really what's important. But there are many different attacks for and tricks for doing that. But it's a thankless job. It's really hard, and we don't get it right a lot of the time. But the research show that it's a battle worth fighting for our children. It is something that is really important. I mean, some kids limit themselves and it's not an issue, but I do think that that's really important, is turning it off at the same time and getting sleep.
Somebody else is talking about social media challenges. Apparently a Benadryl one, taking large amounts of Benadryl. Yeah, there are a lot of crazy social media challenges. I've talked about them when I go out, and just the matter of understanding that they're out there and talking to your kids about this is not a good idea. And some of these can be very dangerous.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just another good reason to try to do what you can to keep that conversation, going with kids about, screen habits. And again, it can be great to let them show you around, and it's no fun when they beat you at Fortnite, for example, but they love it. It's a healthy role reversal, and it does keep that conversation, keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and it's always good to just understand what they're playing. And when they only just show you the videos they're watching, they're laughing over, watch them. I mean, half the time, I may not find it funny, but I'm definitely gonna watch it. So.
Yep. And you might have to bite your tongue to tell them what you really think of it, but suppress that urge.
Let's see. I'm almost down to the very end, and I'm just going to give one more because we're at our time. I've been told early exposure to online porn is being attributed to onset of PTSD. Are you seeing that correlation, and are there good studies to review?
I think that evidence is mostly anecdotal, not to say that it's not real. And I've certainly seen kids who have seen, parents, if you have never seen what like Pornhub is, you really should go and look. It is a horrible eye opener, but you really should know what kids have ready access to, and it can be really it can be awful. And I have seen cases where kids see stuff and they cannot put it out of their mind, and it can be something like a trauma. So it is certainly something to be aware of and to know, what's out there, so that hopefully you can, talk with your kids about it.
Okay, Michelle, I know we've got a lot of thank yous. There are a few. We're at the 3:30 mark. Dr. Weigel, is it a good? I'm going to send you just a few that we couldn't address, and then you'll just email them directly. How's that?
Sounds great.
Works great. Michelle, anything?
Absolutely. No, I saw tons of thank yous, and I personally appreciate the step down approach for less screen time. It'll be helpful here at the Massey House for sure. Yes.
Okay.
You did wonderful, Dr. Weigel. Thank you for all this information.
Thank you so much. All right, well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording. I do want to remind everybody this will go out tomorrow around 3 o'clock. You will receive an email. This will include the link to this recording as well as to link to the survey. You will also receive a certificate of attendance for those who attend live. So that'll be going out tomorrow. Thank you again, Dr. Weigel. Thank you, Michelle. And
Thank you for having
until
me.
the next time, we'll see you then.
See you.